The ground was already shaking before anyone could explain why. Renata Osei heard the blast from inside the aid station. She was sitting on an overturned supply crate, retying the laces on her left boot, because the right one had been causing a blister for 3 days, and she had been switching feet to compensate. The sound was not loud in the way movies make explosions loud. It was a compression, a deep, hollow thud that moved through the floor and up through her boots and settled somewhere behind her sternum. She knew the difference between an ordnance cache going up and a pressure plate catching a person. She had been in Afghanistan long enough to know that difference the way you know the difference between rain on a roof and rain on glass. The frequencies were not the same. She was already moving when the second wave of sound hit. The aid station was a reinforced canvas structure at the edge of the forward operating base, surrounded on 3 sides by concertina walls, and on the 4th by a stretch of cleared ground that led to the perimeter. Beyond the perimeter, the ground had not been cleared. Everyone on the base knew this. There were signs. There was a line of orange markers that stretched in a rough curve through the scrub. The signs were in 3 languages. No one needed the signs, because the rule had been repeated in every briefing since the base had been established. Do not cross the orange markers at night. Renata crossed them at a run. She was not thinking about the signs. She was not thinking about the rule. She was calculating. In the part of her brain that had been trained over 2 deployments and 4 years of emergency medicine, the direction the sound had come from, and the most direct line between herself and whatever was on the other end of it. Her hands were already pulling on her field kit as she ran. The kit was always packed the same way. She could find anything in it without light, because she had rehearsed it so many times that her fingers knew the order before her brain caught up. The darkness was thick. The base had gone to low light after 2,200 hours. The moon was a thin sliver, more suggestion than light. She had a headlamp, but she kept it off. Light makes you a target. She ran by memory and by the faint outline of the ridge to her north, which she had studied every morning since her arrival because looking at the ridge every morning was a habit she had developed on her first deployment, and she had never stopped. 20 meters past the orange markers, she found him. Commander Nathan Cole was face down in the dirt, which was both the worst thing and the best thing about his position. Worst, because it told her that the force of the impact had thrown him forward hard enough to take him off his feet. Best, because face down meant airway down, which meant she needed to check it immediately, which she did, rolling him with the kind of practiced care that does not look like care from the outside, but is entirely care on the inside. He was breathing. That was the first thing she confirmed. That was always the first thing. Nathan Cole was 34 years old. He had been a Navy SEAL for 8 years. He was built like someone who had made a long and serious commitment to never being thrown off his feet, and yet here he was, off his feet, in the dirt, breathing with a sound that told her something in his chest was working harder than it should. His left leg was wrong. She did not look at it for more than 2 seconds, because looking at it more than 2 seconds would not help him, and she needed to think about what she could fix right now in this field with these hands. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was there. Fast, but there. She leaned close to his ear. "I'm here," she said. "I'm a medic. Stay with me." He made a sound that was not quite a word. She counted it as conscious. She worked fast and quiet. Tourniquet first. She applied it high and tight on his left thigh, the way she had been trained, the way she had practiced on a dummy in a gymnasium in Fort Bragg, until she could do it in under a minute with her eyes closed. She did not close her eyes. She watched her hands, because watching your hands is how you make sure the hands are doing what you think they are doing. The kit opened the way it always opened. Her fingers went where they always went. He said something then. 2 words. His voice was low and broken up at the edges, like a radio transmission losing its signal, but the 2 words were clear enough that she heard them. She did not write them in her report later. Some things belonged to the person who said them. The aid station was 47 meters away. She had covered the distance from the perimeter markers to him in perhaps 30 seconds. She now had to cover the same distance back in the opposite direction, in the dark, over ground that had not been cleared, carrying a man who was 212 pounds of dead weight with a compromised left leg. She got her hands under his arms. She started pulling. The ground was rocky and uneven. Her boots kept catching on low scrub. She could not see what she was stepping on, and she was trying, in the methodical back room of her brain, to remember the path she had taken to get here. the places where the ground had felt solid, the angles she had moved through. She moved in a straight line as much as she could. Straight lines were safer than angles in terrain like this. Nathan made a sound every few meters. Not always the same sound. Sometimes it was breath. Sometimes it was something closer to language. She talked to him while she moved. She told him what she was doing. She told him the name of the ridge to the north. She told him it was not a beautiful ridge, that he was not missing much by not being able to see it right now, that she had been looking at it for 3 weeks and it was frankly not worth the view. He laughed. It was not a full laugh. It was the bruised edge of one. But it was there. "What's your name?" she said. Not a question. A command. "Keep him talking," he told her. "Okay, Nathan," she said, still pulling. "You're heavy. I need you to know that." He said something that might have been an apology. "I don't need an apology," she said. "I need you to keep breathing." He kept breathing. She counted her steps. This was a habit she had from her first deployment, when she had asked a senior medic how he managed to stay calm during casualty extractions, and he had said that he counted his steps, that giving his brain something to do with numbers kept it from doing things with fear. She had adopted the habit immediately and had never told anyone about it, because it seemed like a small and private thing. She counted to 143 before she crossed back over the orange markers. 2 medics were waiting at the perimeter. They had been there. They had their equipment ready. They had not crossed the line. She handed Nathan Cole to them without a word, and then she sat down in the dirt on the cleared side of the perimeter and put her hands on her knees and looked at the ground between her boots. Someone put a blanket on her shoulders. She did not notice for several minutes. Inside the aid station, the doctors worked. She could hear them through the canvas. She could identify the sounds of what they were doing by the order in which they were doing it. She did not go inside. She sat on the overturned supply crate where she had been sitting before the blast, the same one, the boot she had been retying still half-tied, and she listened to them work, and she breathed. The night was still dark. The ridge was invisible. The orange markers at the perimeter were faint outlines in the low light, a rough curve through the scrub, and beyond them the ground was exactly what it had always been. She had been in Afghanistan for 61 days. She had 53 more to go. She finished tying her boot. There are things about war that training prepares you for, and there are things that no training has ever successfully prepared a person for, and the gap between those two categories is where most of the real stories live. Renata Osei had known this since her first deployment. She had known it in the theoretical way that intelligent people know things before they experience them, the way you can understand, in the abstract, that fire is hot before you have ever touched a flame. Then you touch the flame, and then you know it differently. She had grown up in Columbus, Ohio, the second of 3 daughters born to a Ghanaian father who taught mathematics at a community college and an American mother who was a registered nurse who worked the night shift at a hospital on the east side of the city. The house she grew up in was organized around the principle that things should be done correctly the first time, because there was rarely a second chance to do them over. Her father said this about equations. Her mother said this about patience. Renata had absorbed it as a general theory of the universe. She had joined the army at 22, after 2 years of nursing school and 1 year working an emergency room floor that had taught her, very efficiently, that she was better under pressure than most people, and that she had no patience whatsoever for situations that could be improved, and were not being improved because someone was waiting for permission. This last trait had not always served her well in the military. It had served Nathan Cole very well on the night of the blast. He was flown out of the forward operating base to a larger medical facility at Bagram Airfield, 6 hours after Renata dragged him across 47 meters of unsecured terrain. She learned later, from another medic who had been at the receiving end of that flight, that Nathan had been conscious for part of the journey, and had asked twice about the medic who had come for him. He had used the word dragged, which was accurate. He had described the medic as someone who had talked the whole way, and had mentioned the ridge. Renata was not told this directly. She heard it through the compressed, informal network of information that moves through military medical units, the kind of network that does not appear in any organizational chart, but is often the most reliable source of accurate information on a forward operating base. She filed her incident report at 6 in the morning. 17 pages. She described every decision she made from the moment she heard the blast to the moment she handed Nathan over at the perimeter. She documented her clinical assessments. She documented the tourniquet placement and the time of application. She documented the terrain, the visibility, the distance. She noted, in plain and factual language, that she had crossed the cleared perimeter without authorization. She explained why. She signed her name. The report was received. She was told it had been received. She was given a form number and told that the form number could be used to reference the incident in future correspondence. She did not hear anything further for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, she worked her shifts. The forward operating base was not a quiet place. There were other patients, other nights, other situations that required her hands and her training and her specific inability to wait for permission. She slept 4 to 6 hours at a stretch. She ate in the mess tent with the same small rotation of people she had eaten with since her arrival. She looked at the ridge every morning. She wrote to her mother twice a week, letters that told the truth about everything except the things her mother would have worried about, which meant the letters contained less actual content than they might have, but they contained the warmth she wanted her mother to receive, and she decided that was the more important thing. On the 22nd day after the incident, she was called in for a debrief. The officer who conducted it was a captain named Gerald Ford, which was not an easy name to carry, and which he appeared to have made peace with years ago because he did not react to the slight hesitation most people produced when they first heard it. He was thorough and professional and asked his questions in a circular way, approaching the same points from different directions, as though checking whether her answers would change depending on the angle. They did not. She answered the same questions the same way each time. Yes, she had crossed the perimeter. Yes, without authorization. Yes, she had understood that the ground beyond the perimeter had not been cleared. Yes, she had made that crossing deliberately. No, she had not experienced any hesitation. Captain Ford paused on that last answer. No hesitation, he repeated. No, she said. He wrote something down. She did not try to read it. There was a second debrief 4 days later, with a different officer, a major whose name she later could not recall with precision, whose questions were slightly different in structure but identical in destination. She answered those the same way too. She was told, following the second debrief, that a commendation had been initiated on her behalf by 2 officers whose names she was given. She was told that the process would take some time. She was given a form number for this as well. 2 weeks later, she was told the commendation had been referred for further review. She asked what that meant. She was told it was standard procedure. She looked at the person who told her this and did not say anything further, because she had learned by that point that there were conversations where continuing to ask questions produced information, and conversations where continuing to ask questions produced the same answer in slightly different packaging, and this was the second kind. She went back to work. Nathan Cole was recovering at a medical facility in Germany. She knew this because the informal network told her so. She knew his left leg had been reconstructed with plates and screws, and that the surgery had gone well, and that he had been moved from critical to stable in the first week, and from stable to recovering in the second. She did not know much more than this. His name was not attached to any document she could access. The incident report she had filed was not attached to any response she could access. The form numbers she had been given led to files that required clearance levels she did not have. She had 53 more days in Afghanistan, and then she was going home. She counted those days the way she counted her steps in the dark. Nathan Cole had an 8-year-old daughter named Lucy. She liked astronomy. She had a glow-in-the-dark star chart on her bedroom ceiling that Nathan had put up himself, flat on his back on her bed for 40 minutes with a pencil and sticky tack, getting the major constellations in roughly the right positions. She could name all of them. She quizzed him on them when he called home, which he did twice a week, from whatever secure line he could access, and she held the star chart and pointed at it as she asked even though he could not see the pointing. He thought about this in the hospital in Germany. He thought about it because he had told Renata Lucy's name in the dark, in the field, while she was pulling him toward the perimeter, and he could not entirely remember why he had said it. People say things when they are in pain and afraid. He did not think he had been trying to give Renata any particular information. He thought he had simply been trying to keep something real in his mind, something that had weight and color and a voice that asked questions about constellations, something that made the dirt under him less absolute. He had been a Navy SEAL for 8 years. Before that, 2 years of officer training, 4 years of undergraduate, a childhood in a small town in rural Oregon where his father had run a hardware store and his mother had taught piano lessons in the living room of a house that always smelled faintly of rosin and sawdust. He had been in difficult situations before. He had been in situations that required him to stay inside his own head and keep it organized. He was good at this. It was one of the specific things he was good at. But there was something about the blast that had been different. Not the pain, though the pain had been significant. Not the darkness or the ground or the fact that he had been in a field that had not been cleared, and he had known this and had moved through it anyway because the route had been changed at the last minute, and the new route had gone through terrain that should have been assessed before any person set foot on it, and had not been. A failure he was still thinking about even in the hospital bed in Germany, turning it over like a stone. What was different was the 47 meters. He knew the distance because Renata had counted her steps and had told him the count when they crossed the perimeter, the way you might tell someone the score of a game you had both just survived. He had been partly delirious by then. He remembered the number. He remembered the ridge she had mentioned. He remembered that she had told him the ridge was not a beautiful ridge and that this had struck him, in the fog of that particular moment, as a very funny thing to say. He had laughed. He was fairly sure he had laughed. In Germany, recovering his left leg in a framework of metal that his surgeon called a marvel of engineering, and that Nathan privately called an argument, he started asking questions about the medic. He was told she was attached to a coalition medical unit. He was told her name. He was not told much else, because the incident had been classified at a level that made his own access to information about it somewhat limited, which was a strange experience for a man who moved through classified spaces professionally. He asked his commanding officer. He was told the incident was under review. He asked what that meant. He received an answer that explained nothing. He recovered. He was transferred from Germany to a rehabilitation facility in the United States. He relearned how to walk with the hardware in his leg, which took 3 months, and a great deal of the specific stubbornness that had made him good at his job, and that now directed itself at a set of parallel bars in a therapy room in Virginia. Lucy came to visit with her mother every weekend. She brought the star chart once, folded up in her backpack, and unfolded it on his hospital bed, and quizzed him on the constellations, and he got most of them right. He started making calls. Not official calls. The official channels had produced form numbers and review notices, and a silence so consistent, it had begun to feel intentional. These were the other kind of calls, the ones that move through the network of people who have served together or trained together, or owe each other something that does not have a name in any organizational document. He asked the right people the right questions. He followed the information where it led. 14 months after the blast, he had Renata Osei's phone number. He called once and got voicemail. He left a message that said who he was, and that he was looking for her, and that he would like to speak with her when she was willing. He did not say anything else. He did not know what else to say on a voicemail. She called back within the hour. He did not expect that. "I wondered how long it would take you to find me," she said. 14 months, he said. "That's slower than I expected," she said. He told her he had been working on a complicated leg. She told him she had heard about the leg. He asked if she would be willing to meet in person. She said yes. The October afternoon in Columbus, Ohio was gray and cold in the way that Ohio Octobers are gray and cold, which is a specific and undecorated grayness. Not dramatic, not poetic, just overcast and direct, like someone had pulled a curtain across the sky and forgotten to pull it back. Renata met Nathan at a coffee shop on the east side of the city, 3 blocks from the hospital where her mother had worked nights for 20 years. She arrived first. This was a habit. He came in 7 minutes later. He was in civilian clothes and he walked with a cane he was clearly working on not needing. She could see the work in each step. She recognized the particular stubbornness of it. He saw her, crossed the room, and sat down across from her. She looked at him for a moment. "You look worse than I remember," she said. He said, "I remember everything." There was a pause, not an uncomfortable one, the kind of pause 2 people take when they are deciding which door to walk through first. She ordered coffee. He ordered coffee. The person behind the counter was young and cheerful, and completely unaware that the two people he was serving had last seen each other in the dark in a minefield in Afghanistan, which was exactly the right level of unawareness for a Tuesday afternoon coffee shop in Columbus. Nathan told her what he had found out over the 14 months. He told it in order, the way a person with his training tells things, without unnecessary weight on the wrong parts, letting the facts carry themselves. The commendation that had been initiated, the level at which it had stalled, the reason that had eventually, through fragment and implication and one conversation with a JAG officer who chose her words carefully, become clear. The reason was the perimeter crossing. Not that it had happened. The two officers who had initiated the commendation had done so because of the perimeter crossing, because of what she had done in the unsecured field in the dark. The problem was different. The problem was that commending an action that had not been authorized created a liability question about what it meant that the action had not been authorized. It created questions about the route change and the terrain assessment, and the signed-off clearance, and the paperwork that had been filed in triplicate and had turned out to be wrong. Commending Renata meant looking carefully at everything that had required Renata to move. Someone had decided not to look carefully. She listened to all of this without interruption. She held her coffee with both hands. She watched his face while he talked. When he finished, she said, "I knew." He looked at her. "Not all of it," she said, "but I knew something like it. The form numbers, the review notices, the second debrief with the different officer asking the same questions. I knew what the shape of it was." "Why didn't you push harder?" he said. She considered this. "Because I was in Afghanistan," she said, "and then I was home, and my mother made me food for a week, and asked me nothing difficult, and I decided that the shape of what had happened was less important to me than the fact that you were alive." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "The route change," he said. "I know," she said. "It shouldn't have been approved. The terrain hadn't been assessed. I know that too. Someone signed off on it. I know." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, Columbus moved past the window in its Tuesday afternoon way, people in heavy coats, a delivery truck idling at the curb, a woman pushing a stroller with the focused efficiency of someone who has somewhere to be. He told her about the Veterans Advocacy Organization. He had been in contact with them for 2 months. They had a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Sloan, who had spent 12 years as a military officer before leaving to do this work, and who had, in Nathan's assessment, a comprehensive understanding of what could be documented and what could be proven, and how those two things were sometimes the same thing and sometimes not. He said Patricia wanted to meet Renata. Renata looked at her coffee. "What does meeting her lead to?" she said. "A documented account," he said. "Witnessed, notarized, submitted through the organization's formal complaint channel. Not a lawsuit. Not a lawsuit. A record. Something that exists and can be found." She thought about the form numbers, the files that went nowhere. The incident report she had filed at 6 in the morning, 17 pages, that had been received and assigned a number, and had never generated a response she could see. "All right," she said. They walked to Patricia Sloan's office together. It was 6 blocks away. Nathan worked on not needing the cane for 6 blocks, and she matched her pace to his without saying anything about it, and they got there in about 12 minutes, which was a reasonable time for 6 blocks. Patricia Sloan's office was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of old carpet and good intention. The walls had photographs, not decorative ones, not landscapes or prints, but photographs of people, many of them in uniform, some of them clearly taken a long time ago. Renata looked at the photographs while Patricia and Nathan talked briefly at the door, and she thought about the kind of office that accumulates photographs like this, the kind of work that puts them there. Patricia was 51. She was precise and direct in the way that people with her particular history often are, not cold but economical. She did not spend words she did not need to spend. She shook Renata's hand and looked at her with an attention that was not invasive and was not casual, the kind of attention that files things accurately. They sat down. Patricia had the incident report. She had obtained it through a records request that had taken 14 months to produce a document with 3 pages classified and 2 paragraphs redacted, but she had it. She had Nathan's medical records from Germany, the portions that were accessible. She had a record of the commendation that had been initiated, and the record of the level at which it had stalled, obtained through a request to a congressman's office that had been sitting on a similar inquiry for 2 years. She laid all of this out the way someone lays out evidence, carefully, with attention to sequence. Then she asked Renata to tell her what happened. Renata told her. She started with the sound of the blast. She went through the decision to cross the perimeter, the terrain, the tourniquet, the 47 meters, the count of steps. She told it the way she had told it in the debriefs, in the flat and factual register that was not coldness but precision, the same register she used when she was working, when her hands needed to know exactly what her brain thought was happening so they could do the right things in the right order. Patricia listened and took notes and asked, twice, very specific questions about timing. When Renata finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment. "The route change," she said. "Yes," Nathan said. "Who signed the terrain clearance?" Nathan gave her a name. Patricia wrote it down. "That officer," she said, "retired 8 months ago." The room was quiet. "Retirement doesn't close a record," Patricia said. "It just changes the address of accountability." She told them what she was going to file, and where she was going to file it, and what the realistic range of outcomes looked like. She did not promise anything she could not control. She said the process would take time. She said there were people in the right offices who were already aware of the shape of this case and had been waiting for documentation that had a human name attached to it, rather than a file number that went nowhere. Renata signed the account. Nathan witnessed it. Patricia notarized it. They walked out into the October afternoon. The gray sky was doing what it had been doing all day, which was simply being gray, without apology or elegance. Nathan's cane made a sound on the sidewalk that was steady and deliberate. Renata put her hands in her coat pockets. "What happens now?" she said. "Now," he said, "it exists." "That's enough?" He thought about this. "It's more than it was," he said. She looked down the street. The delivery truck was gone. The woman with the stroller had moved on somewhere. Columbus was doing its afternoon things, ordinary and continuous, and entirely indifferent to the document that had just been signed on the 4th floor of a building 6 blocks east. "My mother is making dinner tonight," Renata said. "Good," he said. "You could come." He looked at her. "She makes too much food," Renata said. "She always makes too much." He said he would come. They walked in the direction of a Tuesday evening that had no particular significance except that it was theirs, and they moved through it at a pace they had both chosen, and neither of them said anything else for a while because there was nothing else that needed to be said right now, and they were both people who understood the difference between silence that is empty and silence that is full. The Pentagon did not make an announcement. This was not a surprise to anyone who understood how these things moved. Government does not announce its corrections. It adjusts, quietly, through the accumulation of pressure applied to the right points by the right people at the right time. And then one day a record is different than it was the day before, and no one holds a ceremony for the change itself, only occasionally for what the change acknowledges. What happened, in the months that followed the signed account and the notarized document and the formal submission through Patricia Sloane's organization, moved the way water moves through stone, not forcefully, persistently. A journalist named Owen Carr, who wrote for a publication that covered military affairs and who had a particular talent for reading what was missing from official records, received a tip through a source he had cultivated for 4 years. The tip was not dramatic. It was a file number, a date, and 2 words. Look deeper. He looked deeper. What he found was not a scandal in the way that word is normally used, not a single explosive fact, but an architecture of omission, a structure built from what had been filed late, and what had been reviewed slowly, and what had been stalled at a level where stalling was a decision and not an accident. He wrote a piece. The piece was careful and documented. It named the commendation that had been initiated and the level at which it had stalled. It named the terrain clearance that had been signed and the assessment that had not been performed. It did not speculate. It reported what was in the documents and noted what was absent from the documents, and the absence was as informative as the presence. The piece ran on a Thursday. By Friday, 2 offices had received formal inquiries. By the following Wednesday, the Veterans Advocacy Organization had received a response to the submission it had filed 4 months earlier. The response was not an apology. It was a notification that the matter had been referred to a review board and that a determination would be issued within 60 days. The determination was issued in 41. Renata was notified by phone. Patricia Sloan made the call. She told Renata the outcome in the same economical language she used for everything, without inflation or decoration. The commendation had been approved. The record had been corrected. A ceremony would be scheduled. Renata asked what kind of ceremony. Patricia told her. Small. Private. 12 people in a room in a building in Washington. Not publicized. Not announced to the press. The kind of event that the institution could manage without drawing attention to the 14 months that had preceded it. Without having to explain, on camera, why the record had needed correcting in the first place. Renata was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. "You can decline," Patricia said. "I know," Renata said. "I'm not declining." The ceremony was on a Tuesday in March, which was a month that Washington never fully decides whether it is still winter or beginning spring. The building was a federal building with a security desk and a hallway that smelled of institutional cleaner and the particular gravity that federal buildings accumulate over decades of serious events conducted in serious rooms. 12 people were in the room. Renata knew 2 of them. One was Nathan, standing in the second row, with his cane that he was still working on not needing. He stood for the whole ceremony. She noticed this. She did not say anything about it. The person who presented the commendation was a senior officer, whose name Renata could tell you if you asked her. His face she has already half forgotten, not because it was unmemorable, but because the room had so much gravity in it that individual faces became secondary to the weight of the moment itself. He spoke for about 4 minutes. He was formal and correct, and said the appropriate things. She accepted what he gave her with both hands. Afterward, in the hallway, Nathan found her. "How was that?" he said. "Fine," she said. He looked at her. "I mean that," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing he said, which was 3 sentences, and of which the third became the one people quoted afterward when the story had been told enough times that it had moved from document to word of mouth, from official record to the informal network of people who know what it means when someone crosses a line marked with orange markers in the dark to drag a person back into the light. She did not quote it back to him. She had heard it. It had landed somewhere internal and stayed there, the way certain things stay. They walked out of the building into a March afternoon that could not decide what season it wanted to be. The air was cold and the light was thin, and Pennsylvania Avenue moved in its permanent state of organized urgency in both directions. "Your leg," she said. "Getting better," he said. "You should lose the cane." "I know," he said. "I'm working on it." She looked down the street. "Lucy asked about the ridge," he said. She turned to look at him. "I told her about it," he said. "What you said, that it wasn't a beautiful ridge." "It wasn't," she said. "She wants to know what an ugly ridge looks like." Renata thought about the ridge. She had looked at it every morning for 61 days. It was brown and dry, and it sat against a pale sky with no particular grace. It was the ridge you would get if you asked for a ridge but specified nothing else. "Tell her it looks like every other ridge," she said. "That's what makes it ugly." Nathan looked at her. "She'll like that answer," he said. "I know," she said. They went their separate ways into the March afternoon. Renata had a flight home in 4 hours. She had time to walk for a while before she needed to get to the airport, and she walked because she had always thought better while moving, because motion had always been her natural state, because she was the kind of person who heard a sound in the dark and started moving before the thinking had fully caught up. She thought about the 14 months and the form numbers and the file with the 3 classified pages and the commendation that had sat in a drawer at a command level that no longer needed to be named because the record now said something different than it had said before. She thought about 47 meters of dark ground, an account of steps, and a man who had told her his daughter's name. She thought about the ridge. She still works nights. She says the hours suit her. She has never explained what she means by that, and no one who knows her story has ever asked.